Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today. We hope that you've had a lovely day and a half participating in the DC Retail Summit. We know the team has done really just great work and the hard job of putting on such an important topic for the times that we're in. And thank you for joining us. We have a great topic for today that we want to make sure we certainly provide a lot of information, a lot of guidance, and making sure that as a small business, you're able to navigate the PPP program or the Paycheck Protection Program. We do have a wonderful panel of wonderful guests here today joining us. And I'll start first with my introduction. I am Harold Pettigrew, CEO for the Washington Area Community Investment Fund. WACIF has been around for 30 plus years now, helping small businesses to grow, start, and develop. We are a CDFI, helping to deploy capital throughout the region and helping folks along that difficult path of entrepreneurship and small business growth. And I'm here as your host today for the panel, helping to facilitate questions and discussion amongst the panelists. And then we'll get into some Q&A at the end. We're getting started now. And we will last today roughly through 12:15. Today's topic, as I mentioned, is on the Paycheck Protection Program, a sizable program launched in response to, of course, the pandemic that we're all in. And today we're going to talk about compliance with the program, giving guidance to make sure that small businesses are aware of of how to ensure that they're able to leverage the true benefits of the program. Today, we have with us four panelists: Omar Velasco, Director of Small Business Development Lending at the Latino Economic Development Center; Lori Buttinger, Executive Vice President for Client Services at Alliance Partners; Daryl Maxwell with the DC Bar Pro Bono Center; and Antonio Doss, District Director for the SBA. Let's get started with some further introductions. Omar, you want to kick us off? Tell us a little bit about yourself and LEDC.
Thank you, Harold. I'm the Director of Lending and Small Business Development at the Latino Economic Development Center. We are a CDFI that deploys business loans and consumer loans in the DMV area as well as Puerto Rico. I've been working with LEDC since 2017 as a business coach, program manager, and now in this new role. So very happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Omar. Lori, let's bring you in.
Thanks so much. I'm delighted to be here this morning and early afternoon. So my name is Lori Bettinger, and I am with Alliance Partners. And we have a little bit of an unusual role in this whole PPP scenario. My day job is with Alliance Partners and Asset Manager, but we are actually a wholly owned subsidiary of Congressional Bank located in Maryland. And when the PPP came about, we as sort of a subsidiary really worked closely with our parent Congressional Bank to help really implement their PPP program. And so throughout, I and all of my colleagues had the opportunity to work with a lot of small businesses across the DMV region. And in particular, I think because of just the way we were set up, we were able to work with a lot of entities that weren't yet customers of the bank. And we had a lot of chance to work with, businesses and help them navigate both the world of larger banks and community banks. So I think my experiences have been a little bit different, but just had a great chance to work with businesses of all sides across this area and sort of bring a little bit of a fresh perspective to what I usually do in my day-to-day job.
Excellent. Thanks, Lori. And Daryl, let's bring you in to talk about yourself as well as the Pro Bono Center.
Sure. Thank you, Harold. It's great to be with all of you virtually. As Harold mentioned, I'm Daryl Maxwell. I'm an assistant director of the DC Bar Pro Bono Center. Our organization provides free legal assistance to small business owners and to nonprofits, as well as individuals. But today we're going to be talking about small businesses. Typically, folks who have questions about leases, contracts, et cetera, we help folks through sort of our online presence, providing webinars, training and education. We also provide what used to be a monthly walk-in clinic for small business owners, which we've now converted due to the pandemic into we used to provide a monthly clinic, walk-in clinic. Now we're doing a weekly virtual clinic. In relation to the PPP, we sort of sprung into action partly because we saw this need with small business owners, and also because our volunteers, who mainly come from big firms here in DC and across the region, as well as some in-house corporate counsel, they were having to sort of get prepared to support their clientele, and decided to step forward and on a pro bono basis advise our clients who were interested in trying to pursue whether or not the PPP was right for them, whether or not they were the types of businesses that could take advantage. And we have been able to support so far, I think at last check, somewhere over about 200 businesses to make determinations about whether to apply for the PPP. And we continue to provide business owners with those critical small business legal needs.
Excellent. Thank you, Daryl. And last but certainly not least, Antonio Doss, our leader here in the district office for the SBA.
Well, good morning to everyone, and great to be here again, as Daryl said, virtually with you. Just listening to the panel presentations this morning, the introductions, you get a sense of the richness and the robustness of the resources that exist for small businesses in Washington, D.C., and in fact, in the metropolitan Washington area. The work that the DC Pro Bono Center has done has been exceptionally important for so many people. I hear lots of great reports about it all the time. Our lending community has been fantastic, whether you're talking about a bank like Congressional or one of our micro lenders or community-based CDFI type lenders that we have here today too. It's all a part of the fabric that makes our community one where resources are available and enriched for us. At the Small Business Administration, of course, we've been principally in the spotlight this year for this thing called the Paycheck Protection Program and PPP. 3 letters that probably a year ago nobody ever thought they'd utter as many times as have been uttered. But here we are. This is our environment, and through that, we've and our lending partners nationwide have originated just a ton of loans, literally 5 million loans, over $525 billion just in this year. It's an incredible amount of work that's been done. And it's a full partnership. SBA, the Department of Treasury, our congressional leaders, the executive branch, the White House, everybody kind of pitched into this, and it would have not happened without the lenders making all the applications real. So looking forward to the discussion today about how we can address and support you through the forgiveness process, which is another element to this. You got the loan, now exactly what happens next. So we're looking forward to the conversation. And Daryl, thank you for moderating today.
Absolutely, and pleasure to be here with you all, of course. And Antonio, let's just jump into some questions. I want to put it right back to you. Okay. You are absolutely right. I think PPP will forever go down as an acronym that for the rest of our lives, we will all remember in this space. We know there's been a lot of activity. There's been a lot of information. Just really quickly, just set the baseline for us. What actually is the PPP?
So the PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program, really came about because, again, at the federal level, I saw our federal government work in a way that we don't always see our federal government work. Congressional, executive branch, everybody pitched in because the COVID-19 pandemic was sitting upon us in an economic way such that businesses weren't really able to open and function the way they normally would, particularly those that had customer services where people came into your facility, whether you're in a medical professional and as a dentist or whatever it might have been in that line of work, whether you're a restaurant, whether you're retail, people weren't really permitted in a lot of cases to even enter your space. So revenues were going to be on the decline, in some cases, super significantly on the decline. And businesses weren't going to have the money to make payroll. And if we don't have people earning money, our economy is really not going to be what we need it to be. So what happened with the PPP program was literally, we said, let's pull together, let's find a way to create something that is close to a grant program as we could possibly have, disguised as a loan program, or vice versa, however you want to look at that. And so that's what the whole idea with PPP was about. Let's get money into the hands of the business owners. Let's allow them to keep making them pay their payments to their employees for their work, even though we know in some cases they're not able to work. We still want to make the payments happen. And at the end of the day, we'll continue to have revenue coming into the hands of individual workers. They'll be able to pay for the expenses that they need. They'll be able to consume goods and services that are important to the other businesses in the marketplace. And if they use that money appropriately, by and large, those funds can be forgiven and they won't incur long-term expensive debt. So that's it in short, is the PPP.
Thank you, Antonio. And let's open it up, because each of you have had different parts to play in, whether it's Daryl, you helping folks from a legal standpoint to assess, Omar, and the great work that LEDC has done to help get dollars out the door. Similarly, Lori, I know you've been in the middle of helping folks navigate and access a number of PPP loans as well. What are some of the barriers to forgiveness that we're seeing? The structure of the program obviously was designed, as Antonio mentioned, in essence, to operate like a grant, but we know there are implications on use and other factors that involve. Lori, you might not provide some insights first. What are some barriers that small businesses may face, or businesses may face in general, with achieving forgiveness?
I think one thing that certainly struck me about the application process was small businesses have a really wide variety of bookkeeping practices. And I don't mean this in that, some people are, nothing nefarious, but, some small businesses I think have more robust controls and documentations and, business accounts. And others, particularly when you're dealing with maybe self-employed people or sole proprietors, might have a little less of a delineation between, business and personal accounts, which I think is probably fine in the regular world. And, they've existed and been successful business people for years under this. But in PPP, which for many of these business people was probably one of their first formal points of interaction with the government program, all of a sudden, you're being asked for documentation that it's not that you don't want to produce it, you just don't have it, and you haven't had any need to produce those sort of documents, in your past, and that hasn't hurt you in any way. And I think that we might see some of that with the forgiveness process again, right? Where, especially if you're sort of a small business with some employees, you're going to be asked to produce, make sure you have like your utilities or your rents or, different types of payroll statements. I think honestly, for some small businesses, this might be the first time they've had substantive interaction with their payroll providers, and they're asking for these forms that maybe they know what they mean because they've used them with their accountant or QuickBooks and tax preparation. But do a lot of people really know a 940 and 941, what that actually means, what the differences are? And I think that in forgiveness, you're probably going to see some of that again, where you're really asking small business owners who have been putting their heart and soul for most of their careers into just making their business work, now just come up with more documents, not unreasonable requests, but they're just new requests. They take a lot of time and energy to pull all that documentation together. So to me, that's probably one of the bigger challenges, particularly for some of your really small businesses.
And Daryl, naturally through your lens, through your colleagues, you're doing much of the legal assessment, not only from the front end of whether a business should apply, but also whether they will achieve that forgiveness. Are there any legal considerations that you've seen or that have been highlighted in your assessment?
Well, there's certainly a high level sort of legal consideration, but there's a couple of very granular distinctions that need to be made. And I think Lori's point about where people are, business owners are on a continuum, is really important was really important to highlight, because when I talk to, and when our volunteers talk to business owners, you either have the person with the proverbial shoebox full of papers, or you've got somebody who has QuickBooks on lock and has no problem being able to provide evidence. But particularly for this program, there is this emphasis on workers and employees. And if you were unclear as to whether or not your worker is an independent contractor, who independent contractors under this program have their own case to be made for receiving PPP funds. But you, as a business owner, cannot count them as an employee for the purposes of the loan becoming a forgivable grant. And we work with businesses all the time, and some of them on this particular, who were seeking out PPP, when we'd ask, well, how many employees do you have? And they say, well, we don't have employees, or we're only working with 1099s. And we get into the uncomfortable situation where we have to say, well, this is going to decrease, the program is at 60%, the payroll costs or a portion of that 60%. If you don't have payroll that is, for employees, that's going to significantly decrease what you can achieve when you're looking to get the PPP. So that's certainly one of the places, where I would direct people as a potential issue. That was on the front end. And then quickly on the back end, I would just say the documentation, and having gone through some of the paperwork again the last few days, documentation is so important. And you have to also think about, some people have shifted from, as we all have, shifted from an office space, maybe a restaurant space, and maybe they're spending a lot more time at home. I'm constantly reaching for, wait, where is this document? Where is this contract I was reviewing 5 minutes ago? And if you're not keeping all that stuff together, you can get into some real trouble, or at the very least, it's going to delay it's going to delay the probability that you get sort of a clean record and that you immediately get forgiveness. So those are important points, I think, to think about.
Thank you for that, Daryl. And Omar, I know LEDC did a great job standing up a program and deploying PPP loans, and now have the equally difficult task of advising businesses on the forgiveness process. Give us some insights, perhaps, of what you all have seen working with clients and ushering them towards forgiveness of the PPP.
Yeah, so we disbursed over 100 PPP loans, over $2 million, and some clients with some particular business models, for example, in construction, the turnover rate of employees is high, so it's difficult for them to rehire the same people with the same qualifications, because they depend on the projects available. So maybe in the past I hired a plumber with a really high hourly rate, but now I need to hire a carpenter, things like that. So there are complexities, and also businesses like childcare, they have not been able to operate in full capacity. And so I think it's case by case. You encounter barriers. Self-employees, I think, is the easiest scenario, but definitely, for example, breweries, some of them produce, it's very seasonal, right? So they hire people during a certain period, but they have to wait until they use up the inventory. So there are complexities, definitely.
Thank you, Omar. And Antonio, you have a bit of the gift and the challenge of not only working in a narrow sort of geography, because I know you have colleagues all across the country that are working at the district level as well, but you're also seeing from all the financial institutions and hearing some of the different challenges. But from your lens of things as well, what are you seeing as some of the barriers that either banks have articulated or small businesses have articulated into achieving forgiveness?
Yeah, I think the biggest barrier right now is really just lack of clear knowledge. everything is so new. You know, every step of this whole process has been new, uncharted territory. And so we've had a great bit of communication that we put out between, again, SBA and the Treasury Department, who we've worked extremely closely with on this whole process. So if you're unfamiliar with the program, you know, you have to really get very familiar with SBA.gov and Treasury.gov and all the interim rules, the Q&A documents and such that we have online. And to be honest, there's a lot of information. I think initially the goal was to make this kind of simple and straightforward. I think that was what the congressional intent was. Let's not bury and burden the business owner with undue amount of responsibilities. And at the same time, you know, we're managing against what always happens whenever the government really goes heavy into benevolence to try to do the good and right thing. There are people who take advantage of the government. And they take advantage of the government in the ways that the government doesn't want them to take advantage of them. And so that results in fraud. It results in inappropriate actions that take place. And so the government then gets forced into balancing the situation where a borrower has taken out money for the PPP program, essentially never intending to use it for the purpose it was intended, and taking those monies and putting them on personal expenses, you know, buying expensive items, you know, some of them very notable. If you get a Maserati or a Lamborghini or something, people are going to notice it. So you have those things that hit, and there becomes a lot of publicity around it. And so no government wants to look like it's provided this funds and it's been a boondoggle for people. So it requires us to make sure we've got good, clean documentation. We've got good, obvious information that justifies and verifies that the funds were used the way they were supposed to have been used, and that we can rest assured that we have protected the money, because the money is ultimately everybody who's on this call. We're all taxpayers. And so none of us really want our portion of the tax money to go for some frivolous use that's illegal, immoral, and inappropriate for these funds, particularly when people running businesses are in so desperate need of those monies in order to keep their business going and also pay their employees who desperately also needed the funding. So that's our big challenge right now, is managing the fraud piece and creating better awareness of the actual rules and the process.
Thank you, Antonio. And those are actually good points. I mean, it's laughable, unfortunately, you know, at some level. But I know that you're saying these examples because, unfortunately, there's some truth to them.
Yeah, they unfortunately exist.
That's right. What are some of the, just so we could stay on this just for a moment, some of the implications if it's not used correctly? Of course, if there's fraudulent activity, that could end up in,
right,
the harshest of penalties. But if you don't achieve forgiveness, what are the implications for a business?
Yeah, if you don't achieve forgiveness, I mean, the good news is that this is not a high interest rate, high debt situation. So the government's not charging usury rates plus. You know, this is essentially cheap money. So, and again, the framers of the legislation didn't want to have a business owner in a situation that if for some reason they couldn't meet these qualifications, that they would then end up being in a strife situation where they really couldn't exist anyway, because now they're burdened with debt. So to be able to make the loan payments at a small interest rate, to be able to have that deferment period, all of those things were designed to give confidence to the business owner that they could take the money, get their business back on its footings, and then hopefully as the COVID-19 environment ceases and moves away from us, that then they're able to resume something close to what was their normal business practices, with obvious adjustments that we're all making from this new environment. So there's a repayment factor, and that's not all that bad. I mean, it's going to be a couple years worth of repayment, but hopefully it's just a fraction of the amount that the borrower had requested money for. If they've used the program relatively the way it was supposed to, we're going to have cases where people didn't come back to work the business couldn't hire people back for whatever reason, but they're not going to be stuck with paying the full amount back. And it's got to be the vast majority of those cases. It'll be just making a payment over a period of 2 years.
You hit on an important point, Antonio, and Lori, I'm gonna toss it to you just from what you've seen as well, that some business owners have had the best intention in terms of using the funding and have wanted to use it in a proper way so that they can forgiveness. But what are some of the just practical barriers that businesses have faced? You hit on, Antonio, some of the employment elements. Lori, have you seen any other elements that may present themselves as challenges for forgiveness?
So we're still early in the process. So I feel like I have probably a narrower view than I did of all of the things that can pop up in the PPP application process or that did come up. And I don't want to sound like a broken record. And, I'm going to also go back and reference some of the remarks that Daryl made. I think the biggest challenge I've seen so far is around documentation. And in particular, what type of documentation do I need? And if I drill down a little more, particularly for the self-employed people who might not necessarily have been paying themselves a salary per se, and, just trying to understand how that all works. We've also, seen sometimes with some of the larger companies, I think that they're just trying to figure out, do they qualify for the easy form, to the extent that they may have had some reductions and try in, staffing and trying to figure out were those reductions, because of COVID related health restrictions, were they required to shut down, and would that put them into qualifying for that easy form, which is much simpler? That's where I would say I've seen some of the initial things. So I would say it's still mostly documentation. What documentation do I need? And just especially around, some of the self-employed independent contractors, but then also with, some of the businesses in particular that have more W-2 employees, trying to figure out, hey, if I reduced headcount, was that for a reason that's allowed under the easy form? And just trying to work on making those determinations. And the other thing that, and I mean, this call has such great, people with such great resources. What we're always telling people is you don't have to make these decisions in a vacuum. There are so many resources out there, particularly, if you're a DC small business. And every call, that I've participated in, including, just on the SBA hotline, there's been incredibly helpful people on the other end giving you really good advice and being willing to, go out on a limb and make opinions about how to fill something out. So, for people that are struggling, I would say don't do that alone and avoid, you have great resources. And as time goes on in the forgiveness process, you have people that are now getting the benefit of a lot of experience and can give you really good answers.
Excellent. Thank you, Lori. And just for everyone who is listening in, I'm going to ask a couple more set questions of the panel. And I know we do have some questions coming into the Q&A. And so I definitely want to get to that section because I know there's some pretty specific questions. So if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A and we'll start going through those and getting some answers to those as well. So for the set questions with the panel and from each of your different lenses, let's talk about the pathway from here. Because we know the forgiveness process hasn't quite started yet. But what's some of the guidance that you would give point forward to when that process starts to hopefully achieving forgiveness, the guidance that you would give to the small businesses that are listening in now? Let's maybe kick off. Omar, you want to kick off for us? Sure.
So the very first recommendation would be reaching out to your lender and ask him how the loan amount was calculated, because when at the application phase, clients applied and they did a calculation, but we requested documentation and did the due diligence, and we came up with the right amount. And sometimes maybe the client wasn't aware how that was calculated really. So it's important to revise that and see now in the reality that how you need to use the money, especially in payroll, and also the expenses of clarify with your lender that the expenses, for example, are expenses that you were incurring before February, right? Not like recent expenses. So all the details about that, and then start collecting the documentation, and the other recommendation is understanding the timeline. So you have 24 weeks after the disbursement, and then you have 10 months to apply, but you don't want to wait that long. So it's good that you talk with your lender how you can start the process as soon as possible. And yeah, that's it.
Thanks, Omar. Daryl, any thoughts there on the pathway forward here?
Sure. So one of the things I wanted to make sure to highlight was for, as you're looking through the application, as you're thinking about forgiveness, for some folks, they may have incurred costs that are outside of, or at least didn't begin before the period. Like, let's say, for example, you were operating out of your home and now you've realized, oh, maybe I decide, and this is not likely, but I know there are people who have done this, who decided to start operating out of a space. Maybe it's a little bit easier. Maybe right now it's a little bit cheaper, and they figure, oh, well, rent or utilities are things that I can charge, that I can charge to this PPP application, but you can't unless the service began before February 15th. And so, much like Omar said, much like Lori said, you want to make sure that sort of the delineation of time is fairly clear. And also you want to, for your covered period, you want to make sure that you've done the proper assessment as to when you're trying to determine sort of what period you're at that puts you in the best position, or your business in the best position to achieve forgiveness. You want to make sure that, and thankfully the SBA was fairly flexible in the type of timing you could look at, or the type of weeks you could look at for your forgiveness period. But again, if you're unclear, and hopefully you've worked with a service provider to explain some of this, because this can be, even though the numbers, and I'm no accountant, but some of the numbers can seem a little bit challenging, or at least you're reading a lot of them, so it can get a little repetitive. You want to make sure that you understand. I mean, if you're filling out the EZ form, it's not very long, but you want to make sure the numbers are right. So that's one of the things I would mention that.
Lori, did you have any additional thoughts here on the pathway forward?
Well, I have two thoughts. One, I know that some lenders are certainly recommending, and a lot of PPP recipients are waiting to see if there might be additional congressional action to create some form of auto forgiveness pathway, for loans under a certain threshold. I think the one that we commonly hear discussed is under 150,000. I certainly think that being in the business of trying to predict what Congress will or won't do is a challenging one. But, given the time that you have to actually apply for forgiveness, which, you can do it within 10 months of the end of your covered period, I think to the extent that a borrower does want to wait and see what happens, whether it's in the next few weeks or few months, that seems reasonable, particularly if they think they might have a more complicated forgiveness application for a relatively small loan size. I know a lot of people are taking that approach, and I think it's a completely reasonable one. And in addition, I think we've heard, and I know Omar mentioned this, going to your original lender, they can be a great resource. Different lenders have different ways of applying for forgiveness, whether it's an automated portal or more of just submitting a PDF. But there are websites like ppp.bank, which was sort of developed as a collaboration between community banks and fintech, Mark Cuban of all people. And you can go there and you can actually put in your numbers and it'll generate a PDF, and it's a calculator, and they're not really capturing your data. So you can just sort of play around. So I think things like that website are really good resources for small business owners trying to decide, you know, to Daryl's question about like, do I do it now or not? And what do I do? Like, there are some good resources that you can just, you know, find fairly easily.
Thank you, Lori. And Antonio, any thoughts on the pathway forward from here?
Yeah, I'll go with the 3 Ds: documentation, documentation, documentation. You know, I think to Lori's point, we have this great situation with a 10-month period where you don't really have to do anything and you're not making payments. It's just there, but it's the perfect time to consistently just build and maintain the appropriate documentation so that if and when we get to that point where you're having to submit a request for forgiveness to your lender, you don't have to scramble. You don't have to run around and worry what I did with this piece of paper or this document evidence or, you know, this mortgage or, you know, interest statement or lease payment records, payroll. Get organized. Keep yourself organized. This organization thing is not a benefit that's exclusive to PPP forgiveness. It's a good business practice, no matter what kind of business you're in, because it helps you stay on top of your business. It helps you be managing your business and not having your business kind of managing you. And so, you know, look at your payroll expense, look at your non-payroll expenses, build the ledgers, you know, keep again all those the documents straight. Stay in touch with your CPA or your accountant, whoever you're working with, to make sure that you're in touch with them in terms of how you're collecting and keeping information. They'll have a good handle on how it's going to work as well, and be able to help advise you of good practical tools and resources. So to me, it's a lot about documentation. And, you know, we don't know for sure whatever will happen with Congress. There's been a lot of discussion about, you know, there may be additional relief packages and what it might mean. One of the things that to kind of keep in mind is that I think the number is almost 88% of all of the numbers of loans that were made under PPP. So nearly 88% were for loan amounts 150,000 or less. So if there is some kind of additional support that comes and it targets loans $150,000 or less, probably for a lot of people on the call, that's going to be really good news because they're likely to be in that category. For loan borrowers who have larger amounts, you know, if you're over a couple $1 million in loans, you know, you're going to be subject to additional level potential of review. Keep in mind, the funding of the CARES Act also provided significant funding for an organization within government called the Inspector General. The Office of Inspector General is actively looking to make sure, again, that the federal dollar is used wisely, appropriately, prudently, and in accordance with the terms that Congress and the executive branch signed off on. So you have those 2 factors in place. Build your documentation, have it ready, and when the time comes, you can push your information to your lender, and that will kick the process off in a good way.
I think for everyone, if you've not known about the Inspector General and you don't learn about the Inspector General in the future, that is a good thing. Because if you do learn about the Inspector General, it may be that you're in trouble of some sort.
Yeah.
So just to Antonio's point, make sure you keep things documented. Really quickly, Antonio, just to keep you on the spot for a moment, walk us through some of the timing, because we know just because of the unprecedented challenge and things with the pandemic, the goalposts moved a couple times, and that may have provided a little lack of clarity and understanding. What's the covered period? What's the forgiveness period? Just break down the timeline of what we're dealing with here.
Yeah, so the covered period really is dependent on when you actually got your loan. So this is where we had something that was super simple, and because we had additional elements added to it, it got a little more complicated. So the key date really is June 5th. If you got your PPP loan before June 5th, that was the first wave. For example, that comes with a 2-year repayment period. If you end up needing to repay. If you've gotten your loan after June 5th, you're now at a 5-year repayment. And the covered period really reflects back on how your payroll is handled as well. So it's trying to make sure that you're starting your payroll date in conjunction with your loan. So you may have gotten your loan on one Wednesday, but your payroll may not have really been kicked in until the Friday afterwards. And so so there's a couple of points. In fact, I'm going to refer to my little note here, make sure I say this part right. So for payroll cost considerations, the timing of this, you have your payroll needs to have occurred either during your covered period or your alternative covered period. So that's the time frame about what I was speaking in terms of how your payroll actually hits in relation to into a relationship, I'm sorry, to your actual loan amount, loan origination. And what I wanted to read to was just more specifically. So it's either a 24-week, like 168 days total period, that begins on the PPP loan disbursement date. That's if you got it before June 5th. And at that point, you can elect to use an 8-week period or a 56-day period, covered period. If it's, well, let me start with that part. The other key part is that the covered period, no matter what, will never extend beyond December 31st, according to our current guidance. So, so again, if you're using a 24-week covered period, then if your payroll, if your PPP loan proceeds were, for example, on the example we're using our guidance document was on Monday, April 20th, the first day of the covered period begins on April 20th. And then the last day of the covered period would be on Sunday, October 4th. So in our guidance documents, the frequently asked questions on forgiveness, we kind of walk through that part of it just to make sure people understand. In terms of the overall forgiveness, again, there's a 10-month period before you have to worry about making a submission. Once the application is submitted, the lender to the lender, because you're going to submit your application to the lender. And what the lender is going to do is review it. They're going to make some determinations about it. And they're going to submit it to SBA. They get 60 days to make the application move from when they get it from you as a borrower to when it goes to SBA. That doesn't necessarily mean that they'll take 60 days all the time, but that's the window that they do have. So think in terms of expecting 60 days. SBA then has an additional window of 90 days. We may not necessarily, again, take all 90 days, but that's how much time we're allotted to then confirm whether or not the forgiveness is appropriate. And if so, to communicate that back to the lender, who also confirmed that back with the borrower. So those are some of the key dates as well, just looking at how long will this process still be in play.
So that underscores as well, I think, the importance of what you noted in terms of the 3Ds, in terms of documentation.
Yes.
That it could be, yes, in essence, a 6-month period or nearly a 6-month period before a business get the actual green light that they've been forgiven the actual loan, right? Yeah, exactly. And as it stands now, Antonio, just from where the program is positioned, one of the questions that we did get in is, are there any, we know the program, the opportunity to submit PPP loans has ended. Are there any deadlines at present that small businesses need to be aware of?
Not for PPP at this point. They've gotten their money. They can't get more unless, again, there's some additional something that happens at the federal legislative level. And they really have this period to just use the funds. So really the next key thing will be deciding when you want to pursue forgiveness. There are some businesses that are eager to pursue forgiveness. the banking community and the lending community is going to adopt their forgiveness timelines based on their own set of procedures and things as well. So some of the lenders are going to be moving to open up forgiveness window earlier. So if a borrower wanted to apply earlier, they could. Others are, sort of putting that on the back end a little bit later and haven't actually opened up their portfolio for forgiveness at this point. So that may be another piece just to pay attention to. If I didn't mention it before, I should have. Along the way, stay in touch with your lender, your banker. You don't have to call them every day, but periodically just touch base, make sure there's no new developments happening on their end. If you've got developments happening on your end, bankers really don't like surprises. So it's better, just to kind of keep them informed. It even helps them share information around the bank in terms of what's happening in the marketplace right now. So stay in touch with your lender too.
And I will simply confirm that as a lender, I'm sure Omar, you agree, and Lori as well. Yes, we do appreciate when there are no surprises. Absolutely, from that vantage point.
Yeah.
Let's talk. Lori, you hit on this a little bit earlier in terms of folks actually submitting, and there may be some there may be good reasons to hold off on submission. But we also know that banks haven't opened up the process yet, as we still sift out guidance from the federal government. What insights can you provide there in terms of what steps larger financial institutions and things are taking to gear up for this process? What should small businesses look out for?
Well, I think that, again, some of the larger banks and, smaller, I'll put ourselves in there, have been spending the time to have more of an online portal to automate the forgiveness process as much as possible. But I also think, honestly, a lot of institutions are waiting and are also pretty actively lobbying for this automated forgiveness cutoff. And so I think you have both a delay because people are building their mechanisms and a delay because they're hoping for congressional action. And they're not just hoping and sitting quietly, they're hoping and actively advocating for such a process because, they think that will make their lives much easier. I mean, you've even seen, some banks have actually sold their PPP loan portfolio to third parties that have said that, they can potentially have a more efficient, a more technology-driven forgiveness process, a more automated way to submit to the SBA. And so, I think some banks have just said, look, we're not going to deal with this forgiveness process. We're so glad we were able to serve you small businesses, but someone else is going to help with the forgiveness. But, again, congressional action is a tricky thing, but I think that a lot of people are sitting and waiting and watching closely. And the timing of not opening a forgiveness process is not, in my opinion, this is just my personal opinion, it is probably related to that sort of secondary congressional action timeline as well. But that might just be my opinion. I would be interested in what others think about that.
Well, and Omar, I was going to bring you right in on the same question. How are you guys gearing up or setting the stage for some of this process, and what are you seeing?
So we hired a business coach that is going to work just full-time helping clients to apply for forgiveness, because as I said, so it's case by case. And I think, in my opinion, the submission process is fairly simple. So the forms are very easy, and it takes probably 5 minutes, but come up with the information and having the proper documentation in place, which we don't have to upload the documents like to the SBA, so luckily, but we have to have the supporting backup documents. And also the clients, sometimes they don't need to provide the documents to the lender at some of type of documents, but they are required to have them. And we decided that we need a person full-time just to have these conversations with clients and help them collect that.
Thank you, Omar. And we are going to thank you all for the great responses to the questions here. We're going to pause here for a poll. And team on the back end, I think we're ready to start here. So the poll we're putting forward is: your business ready to apply for PPP loan forgiveness? Right, and if you're seeing these, please, the poll on your screen, please participate here. We'd love to see the responses. All right, and while some of the poll, while the polls poll is being answered, what I'm going to begin doing is walking through some of the questions that were specific to some of the businesses that are listening in. And what we'll do is it's only 4 of you guys on the panel here. So if you have any thoughts toward the answer, then certainly feel free to jump on in response. And so really quickly before we dive into the questions, we have responses here. Is your business ready to apply for PPP loan forgiveness? We have 45% at yes, 25% at no, and 30% at I don't know. I think if probably we all had to guess, that would have been a rough approximation of the split there. So that's very helpful. Thank you. Thank you all for participating in that poll. Let's get into the one of the first questions we have here. First comments, I will say though, the DC Bar Pro Bono Center is a great asset. With some great exclamation marks there too, Daryl. So big ups certainly to the great work that you guys do.
I had a plant. I'm just going to let you know that.
That's right. That's right. That's right. So let's get into the first question. And I will confirm, because I know we have worked together for years, and you, my friend, have helped many of our clients in navigating the legal process here. So
thank you.
Absolutely. Let's dive into some of the questions here. We have from D. Lofton. I own my own plumbing company and have a home office. Aside from mortgages and utilities, will you consider business insurance, i.e. workman's comp, auto, et cetera, and material purchases that were required for the business to exist as forgiveness for the other 40%? Any thoughts on that? And some of these, Antonio, you might be in the chute to at least provide an initial response.
Yeah. So, the key, if you go back and think about the basics of PPP, it was all about payroll. And I know some people probably wanted it to be about payroll plus everything else, but it's really all about payroll. We started at 75%, we moved the threshold down to 60%. So the key thing is still that 60% or more had to be used for payroll expenses. When you get into some of the specifics about some of the other expenses, one of the things that I would really recommend is that we refer you back to both the frequently asked questions and the interim final rule for some of the specifics of other expenses that may or may not qualify. I'm always kind of careful to not try to answer all of those specifics because I feel like sometimes one that the factors kind of get adjusted sometimes, and sometimes we don't know all of the information when we're hearing a question. So that would be my recommendation, is to confirm it back exactly what we put in writing through our interim final rule, as well as our frequently asked questions.
Jump on in, Daryl.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, and Antonio is smart for not being for being cautious about being on the record. I will say, obviously a lot of these questions are going to be fact specific in a business that's operating, and I know there's a mention of a home office. When rent is a part of the calculation in that 40%, but this is a home office, and presumably the business doesn't own the home. You as the owner own the home. that gets into not even, it gets into sort of questionable territory and gray areas. And then, how do you start talking about, mortgage interest payments, for example, which is another thing, or utilities, if the business doesn't actually own or that stuff's not in the business's name. So those are the types of questions that would need to be asked to give a more representative and sort of fulsome answer.
Yeah, and even documentation around some of those expenses. Particularly when you're talking home office situations, how do you know those monies are been paid for that purpose? Because like you say, it's in your personal name typically.
All right, thank you all there. I know there's different websites, and we'll get to that toward the end, where folks can get more information and things, but specific to home office issues, are there any additional areas to get specific guidance to that? Just knowing that we've had a number of businesses now to move out of their commercial office space into their home office space. And I'm presuming that's going to be a much more recurring topic and a frequent point of concern. Is there any specific guidance that any of you are aware of that we could point borrowers to?
I would suggest.
I see.
I would suggest that so you have 24 weeks, right? More depending, maybe less. Anyways, before you have to spend the money before December 31st, but you have a long period, because when the loan was calculated, it was just for 2 months and a half, right? Now you have about 4 months to spend money on your payroll. So instead of trying to find expenses from the utilities, things like that, I would keep spending money on my payroll until I hopefully meet the full amount. So that way there is no doubt that you're going to be, that full amount is going to be forgiven, or as much as you can. That would be my advice.
I would definitely agree with that.
Excellent. And let's move on to the next question here. So we do have a question around submission and why banks haven't opened up. And I think we've hit on some of those major points, certainly because there may be an automated forgiveness process or greater ease at which one can achieve forgiveness. I think those are some of the major reasons. Are there any other reasons why businesses aren't able to, if they were in that 40% of folks who are ready to apply for forgiveness? Any other reasons or barriers to why they can't apply as of yet? And if not, that's fine. Right? And I know that's particularly for some of the lending institutions. That's some of the major reasons why, just to avoid having to go through a process when it may be forgiven.
The other part I'd add to it too, Harold, is again, just kind of keeping things in perspective. In January, every bank started the year, every lending institution started the year with expectations of what it was going to do and how it was going to work. And by March, a lot of those plans had significant alterations to them. And so for some banks, it's a question of like, how are we going to process this? Are we going to process these forgiveness applications through receipt of the documentation and request, and review at the branch level, at the business banker unit level? Are we going to set up our own separate unit? Are we going to essentially either hire people or pull people from another unit to stand up the processing? Keep in mind, some of the lenders, particularly some of the larger lenders, literally have thousands and thousands of loans, and none of them were equipped with a processing center for that purpose beforehand. So there's a function of organizational elements, like you mentioned before about the systems component, and then the training. the training part is so important, because if everybody doesn't understand the rules and isn't able to follow whatever the guidance is a certain kind of way, that's going to create inefficiencies and frustrations for clients as well as for the employees who are working in that unit.
Thanks, Antonio. And Daryl, you want to jump in as well?
Say to Antonio's point, I think because of the amount of time we've all spent with clients who were having troubles in the beginning of this process, trying to, waiting for the application, trying to get the application submitted, trying to figure out sort of what the next steps were. We should try to use some grace here when it comes to both the banks and our friends at the SBA, because, and one of the things I was hoping to hear maybe really quick from Antonio was, how long would a program like this typically take to be implemented? Because the type of time that we've had, I think it's really important to continue to message the fact that, yes, there have been some blips, but this has been a really dynamic process. And, I think we can take a little bit more time in terms of getting to the forgiveness part.
Yeah, Daryl, it's a great point. Government is generally considered to be, sort of slow, cumbersome. We get the bureaucratic title attached to us a lot as well. Not saying it's not always misplaced either. We moved at private sector speed on this. Literally, the legislation was passed on a Friday, and the next Friday or Monday after that Friday, within a week, we're up and running. And so did we have every bell, whistle loaded properly? Did we have every I and T crossed? No. But we knew that the press was so great that we couldn't allow the normal 9 to 12 to 15, sometimes 18 months for a program of this size and complexity to be put in place. We would have failed. Industry would have failed our government. Not our government, but our communities and our economy had we acted that way. So my colleagues who worked on all the policies, on the regs, on all the frequently asked questions, the systems, I know they probably drank more coffee than they got winks of sleep for many, many, many days straight. And they did it. So my hat's off to those folks at the SBA, at the Treasury, and all of our affiliated groups who made all this happen as quick as they did. So it was a huge undertaking, and I think our team did a great job. Lots of stuff still yet to be done, but the initial part of it, we jumped forward on it.
We're going to do a little more lightning round, some more of these questions. We have around 10 minutes left here. Antonio, sorry, you're still in the chute here.
That's good.
If there's if someone is denied forgiveness, will there be an appeal process within the SBA?
Yeah, there will be an appeal process. When it goes to the lender, the lender can approve it. They can approve partial amounts of the forgiveness. They can actually deny it in its entirety. And in some cases, they can even deny it without prejudice, which means there might be some additional involvement that SBA has in terms of its review. Nonetheless, if you are denied, our Office of Hearings and Appeals, we call it OHA for short, Office of Hearings and Appeals, will be the entity that will review such requests. And so we'll learn more about that process as we get closer to it as well.
Do we know of any banks that have actually started the forgiveness process, or any financial institution as a whole?
Yeah, there are. In fact, I think Congressional might be one of those ones who've opened up their window.
We did, on Monday.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, see on Monday, yeah.
Hot off the press.
Yeah.
And Omar, I know you
a couple other small.
Go ahead, Antonio, finish it.
I just quickly gonna say a couple of the other smaller banks have, I think M&T is like in a trial period to test out right now, and a large bank, for example, like Bank of America, has not opened theirs yet.
Thank you. And Omar, you had some thoughts?
No, I just wanted to mention that we already submitted successfully applications. So now waiting for the 90 days. Hopefully it will go through.
Excellent.
This one may be a little more speculative, but what's the over/under on there being another round of PPP available? Anybody?
Right now, this is the closest thing I have to a coin. So, this looks like the size of a Super Bowl coin, but it's really a coaster. It's hard to say. I know that Congress, government, leadership still wants to be able to help businesses, but I know there's a lot of things they're working through on the Hill, and so it's hard for us to speculate. We just have to be prepared. If they say go, to go.
Excellent.
Harold, I'll just say I've been a New York Knicks fan my entire life. I would bet on the Knicks going to the championship next year before betting with any sort of confidence that we'd be able to get to another round, in the next 3 or 4 months. But I hope to be wrong.
I'm not. I can't say I want the Knicks to win a championship. So I got it. Okay. Couple more questions here, and some of them a little more serious here. Let's see. One person asked, "What if we have to unfortunately close the business, but we haven't applied for forgiveness yet, since the lender has not opened the applications?" Any thoughts there you guys have? And I'm just kind of leaving it open first because I see you all thinking as well about the analysis around it.
I would think that the borrower would still have the ability to go through the forgiveness process. It would just be delayed. So, the good news is they're not making a payment during that time. So there's no additional hurt beyond closing the business of actually opting to make payments right then. And then I think that's going to be a function of how the expenses play out for the covered period and what expenses were used, et cetera. So they shouldn't, I don't think they're going to be disqualified because their business closed.
And so the key point there is still, to your point earlier, Antonio, probably the theme coming out of this documentation. And so if you have to close, still just make sure you have the documents necessary to show that you've used the funding the way it was intended.
Yes.
And what if they did not, or what if they did not achieve some of the standards under forgiveness, and they do have to close their shop? Any thoughts there?
It's a tougher situation. That the answer is less rosy because there's going to be a repayment. It's low interest rate. It's spread out over some amount of time that might be reasonable, but at that point, a business owner is going to be in they're going to have a lot of other challenges beyond just however much they got for the PPP loan. In that case, you're hoping that you didn't get as much money as you wanted to get on the PPP loan.
Okay, and final question before we start the wrap-up process. We know some banks have started, Congressional has started, as we mentioned earlier. LEDC has started that process as well. The actual process to start, are there forms? Are there online platforms? What should businesses look for to begin that process? Omar, you want to start? Because I know you that you guys started that process, then we'll have you join in after, Lori.
So yeah, there are two options. So the easy form and the full form application. So the main difference is if you were able to rehire the same amount of employees and not reducing the more than 25% of the hourly rates, then you can apply for through the easy form, which is very simple, and pretty much you calculate your payroll expenses and divide that by 0.6 and that's the forgivable amount. But if for many reasons you were not able to keep the same person, or you had to reduce wages, you have still options to like argue why you had to do that, maybe following guidelines from the CDC or the health department, or there are other ways to go around that. But then you have to go through the full form application, and at that point you will need to specify more the employees and do some calculations, additional calculations, ideally with your accountant. But you submit the documents, the supporting documents to your lender, and we have the 60 days to revise them. We are not taking that long. And then we start the process to submit the information to the SBA. And it's just the form. We don't upload documents, as I said, but we have those records. And that's it. So then the SBA has the 90 days to provide a response and answer.
All right, we're coming basically to the end of the session, and there's a lot of very specific questions that we may not have been able to answer anyway with this sort of panel. But let's begin wrapping up here. 30 seconds for each of you. What are some final thoughts or advice, whether we've hit on it and you want to reiterate it, or we've not gotten to it yet, that you would offer businesses listening in on achieving forgiveness here? Laura, you want to kick us off, and then Daryl, Omar, and Antonio, we have you as our closer.
Sure. I would say, again, just to reiterate, don't be afraid to reach out. There are so many great resources available in the city. And I would say we saw this coming in. Like, I work with community banks around the country. Even if that's not your primary bank or banker, or even if you got your PPP application from a large bank that isn't yet accepting forgiveness applications, you could reach out to anyone on this panel. You can, reach out to local lenders. I think in this world, everyone is happy to help the small businesses in their community navigate these questions. And one of the things we found was sometimes when people were working with larger lending institutions, they couldn't find someone to answer their questions. And just anyone who replied to an email or answered a phone, there was this sense of, I'm feeling better about this. And I think with the forgiveness, you should do the same. And I hope there's a good way to make sure that members of the small business community know all of the resources available to them, because I think people should tap those regardless of where they actually got their loan.
Absolutely. Daryl?
Sure. So I want to make sure I'm really impressed. I did not know about ppp.bank, which Lori shared with us. And I'm going there right after we get done with this. What I want to say to business owners who have been able to take advantage of the PPP is, even if you don't start the process of seeking out forgiveness, start the process of putting the application together. Start the process early of collecting documents and knowing where they are and making sure they fit, so that when you're ready to submit, that you're not scrambling. And you don't want to wait, obviously, until the end. You want to wait to give yourself some time, as we mentioned, because things may change. Things, particularly as we saw with the folks who got the PPP early versus the folks who got it a little bit later. So you just want to be prepared. And I'm sure Antonio will hit on this, but documentation is way too important. So.
Sorry, we have less than a minute left. Omar, really quickly, and Antonio, really quickly. Omar, what you got?
Yes, so go to your lender and get familiar with the application process and strategize with them what's the best way for you to apply, if you should apply right away or you should wait a little bit more, and document, as everybody said, document everything.
Thank you, Omar. Antonio, final thoughts here.
Last nail on the hammer on documenting, and then staying connected. SBA.gov/updates to keep current on things happening, and Treasury.gov also for all the information about what's happening with these programs, so that you're up to date on the latest information in case there are additional developments.
Thank you, everyone. We are ending right at 12:15. I'm your moderator, Harold Pettigrew at WACIF. Thank you, Antonio from the SBA, Daryl from the DC Bar Pro Bono Center, Antonio Das, District Director at the SBA, and Lori Buttinger, EVP Client Services from Alliance Partners. Thank you all for joining us today.